So, today I'm going to be talking about immunity to the coronavirus and how it may persist for years to come. I'm going to be discussing a peer reviewed article by Nature and also an article by the New York Times today. So, upon reading this New York Times article, I got the idea that the claim they were trying to make was that the antibodies that are lying in our bone marrow are going to exceed our lifespan. So, they're going to last from 100 years after we've passed, 120 years. That's the claim that they were trying to make in this particular article. Now, how accurate that is, we're going to find out. So I'm going to briefly touch base on some of the claims that this article talks about. They say that memory B cells will continue to mature and strengthen for at least 12 months after the initial infection. So what they're trying to say is that our antibodies after we get infected are going to continue to get stronger and stronger and stronger, even if we don't get infected again. They're also claiming that memory B cells produced in response to COVID or SARS, will be able to tackle any other variants of the virus when combined with the vaccination. They also claim that we won't be needing any booster shots if we've gotten the vaccination, and of course that the antibodies will remain in your bone marrow for years after you've been in contact with the virus. So diving right into some of the experiments and findings, one of the first was conducted by Dr. Ali Elbady. And what Dr. Elbady did was he took 77 people and he took their blood and analyzed it over a period of 3 months post-infection with coronavirus. So he found actually that the antibody levels in the individuals dropped rapidly 4 months after their infection, but the memory B cells in the bone marrow remained. So with this newfound information about the memory B cells remaining in the bone marrow, Dr. Elbady conducted a second experiment where they took the bone marrow samples from 19 people, roughly about 7 months after they had been infected with SARS. And they found that 15 of these people had detectable memory B cells, but 4 of them did not. So this meant that some of them had very few of these memory B cells or none at all. He stated that this tells him that even if you do get infected, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have a super great immune response. So I find that very funny because the article claims that if you were infected and if you got the COVID vaccination, you should be good. You should not need any booster shots. Or if you had just got the vaccination, you should not need any booster shots. It's very interesting that this article says that when in the actual experiment, it's proven that that's not going to be accurate. So to kind of piggyback off of the previous experiment that I discussed, another experiment was conducted by Dr. Newsenweg. And what he did was he looked at how memory B cells matured over time, and he analyzed blood samples from 63 people who had recovered from COVID about a year prior. And what he found was that the neutralizing antibodies that were supposed to prevent reinfection of or with the virus remain unchanged between 6 and 12 months post-infection, while other antibodies slowly disappeared. And as the memory B cells continued to evolve, the antibodies they produced were able to neutralize an even broader group of variants than they thought. So the article was kind of truthful in the fact that they said that the memory B cells would produce antibodies that could tackle any variant, but the part that's a little iffy is the any, because there's not enough research to confirm or deny that. But that part of the article was kind of reliable. So to give a brief conclusion of what these two experiments kind of drew together, we found that the vaccinations significantly amplify antibody levels, but antibody levels decrease over time. Memory B cells remain in the blood and they can produce more antibodies when exposed to the virus. Not everybody has those memory B cells though once they do contract the virus or get vaccinated. So the next item that I reviewed was a peer-reviewed article by Nature. And basically this peer-reviewed article was kind of more in-depth of the very first and second experiments that we talked about. So briefly, we started off with 77 individuals who had been infected, just like the very first experiment that we talked about. But this is just more in depth. So 49% of that population were female and 51% of that population were male, with a median age of 49 years old. And we are taking blood from them 4 months post of their symptoms. People who were vaccinated were kicked out of this experiment. And there was a second experiment actually conducted that wasn't talked about in the first article, where we took 18 people who had recovered from COVID 7 to 8 months after infection, and 11 healthy people as the control group with no history of any COVID infection. Of course, the results that we found were that the memory B cells in the individuals who had been infected were present, and there were no memory B cells in the individuals who had not been infected. And they also found that inactivated flu virus were detected in all of the individuals, but it didn't become active. So when briefly comparing the news article and the peer-reviewed article, I can say that the news article is about 75% accurate. I do feel like they oversell claims a little bit in that they say that we won't need any booster shots had we been vaccinated, and memory B cells produced will be able to tackle any variant of the virus. So the news article also did oversell the fact that the memory B cells will last a long time. The peer review article did say they'd last a long time, but the news article said they'd outlast our lifetimes and remain in our bone marrow even after we've died, which may be oversell. Because we have confirmed that just the antibodies alone by the vaccine are not enough, because they do fade away over time. So we would need a booster shot according to the peer-reviewed article, and we don't have enough research to confirm that the B cells will combat any variant of the virus. Even though it does get stronger, there's no research to show that it will combat any version of the virus. All in all, I would definitely recommend going for a peer-reviewed article rather than a news article, because it's not 100% accurate and it might lead to something being falsely interpreted.